Good morning, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. How are you all doing today? My name is Infantbread, and welcome to my work. Now, if you follow me on Twitter, then you will know that I quite like to make wooden puzzles. Since my job is making stuff out of wood, one of my hobbies is making stuff out of wood as well. I go from big to rather simple ones. Today I would like to record the process of making a puzzle, so I have notes written out for the actual measurements of all the pieces. And the wood I'm going to be using is this. It's called Sipo. It is some random scrap we had left, so you do have some glue marks here. So we'll need to pay attention to that when I'm cutting all these pieces to length. Shouldn't be that big a deal, since I've already made multiple puzzles and I do already have a method in place. With that being said, let's get started. Now the first thing I do is cut all the pieces to length. For the puzzle I'm making today, all the pieces are exactly the same length, so I only need to change this once. What you need to do is pull up this lever, and then that disengages a lock here, so you can actually push this forward and backwards. And then there is another knob here, which you can turn. It's now all set all the way to the right. And if I turn it all the way to the left, that is around 4 millimeters. It doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're making something that needs to fit together, this is really, really important for the fine adjustments. So I'm just going to put my ruler right there and get roughly the length I need, which is 100 millimeters in this case. Around there-ish, I now can see I have 103 millimeters. Now I'm going to use this knob to get it into place. That is done by eye, looks to be about right, so first I'm going to do a couple test pieces to make sure it's actually right. And do remember to always use protection. So now I have all of the pieces cut to length. I do want to talk about my notes here, or my drawings. I have all the individual piece types, and then here I have the amount of pieces needed. There's only 3 different piece types, and one of them is already done. So I have 4 of these already at my workbench, so I don't miscount any pieces. The way a lot of wooden puzzles work is based off of a unit size. It doesn't matter what the unit is, so long as it's the same throughout the entire puzzle. For these puzzles, my unit is 20 millimeters by 20 millimeters. So for piece type 2 and 3, I have 10 millimeters on each side for both of them, which is half of the unit length. Regardless of what size these pieces are, they will always work, as long as you pay attention to what your unit length is. There is one tricky bit with this puzzle, which is on piece type 3. I need to measure from different sides of the saw blade, because thickness matters, this 3 and some odd millimeters. So I can't just do 20, 40, I need to technically do 37 or 36 point something. I already have a way of figuring that out, so it's not that big a deal. And once again, I need to change where this actually is. So what I'm going to do now is push this all the way forward. The reason I had it all the way backwards is because I was cutting pieces directly in half. Because, and I have personally done this, I know from experience, if you're cutting something and it were to jam and turn ever so slightly, you have a thing that's spinning very fast and a thing that's not moving. This, whatever you are cutting, will get caught and go backwards very, very, very fast. I know from personal experience, it is absolutely terrifying. So, when you're cutting something in half, have this all the way backwards. If you're making a channel cut, like what I'm going to do now, have it all the way forwards, because then you actually do need to push it to the side. Other than that, it is exactly the same. I pull up on the lever, and I need to have my ruler out actually. I do need to lower the saw blade as well, but I'll do that separately, that's not that big a deal. That looks about right. So now I'll lower the saw blade and do a couple test cuts to actually make sure this is at the right length, and then I can cut all the pieces. So now we have half the pieces done already. It really goes that fast. We have piece type 2, which only needed 2 cuts. You can see in this sketch here, there's only 2, which are these 2. And these I will put on my workbench, then I'm going to work on the other remaining ones. What these need is the same piece type 2, which is these 2 cuts, as well as, on the other side, these cuts. So instead of 10 millimeters from the outside, I got 20 millimeters from the outside, and then another 20 to make a gap of 40. The process for doing that is pretty much exactly the same, so I will do one of these cuts off camera, but the second one I would like to show what I do there. So now I have all the second cuts done. We have the first one that I already did, and now turn it over. We have the extra 20 millimeter cuts right here. Now the process is basically exactly the same, however I need to measure from the other side of the saw blade, which means what I did for all of these pieces is the right side of this cut and the left side, or the outside of the wood, that is 20 millimeters. I can measure that using the outside jaws, or the big jaws of my calipers. What I need to do now is set the saw blade so that the left side is at, in this case, 40 millimeters. What I can do then is use the smaller jaws of the calipers to measure the inside distance. Like that. I already have a piece of MDF which I used as a test piece to cut, so I definitely know I have the 20 millimeter already set, so that I'll use as my reference. So now we are finished with cutting out all the pieces. Now we have to carve out the middle to actually make these fit together. For my process is lowering the saw blade just slightly from 10 millimeters to say 7 or 8, and then using a planer to make the bottom nice and flat. I will show a piece after I carve out one of them, just to show why I actually do this. For these pieces, it's relatively simple, but for the other piece types, we have just carving out the middle here, and then we have these 2 pieces which we need to carve out. So here is one of the pieces done, and you can see now why I lowered the saw blade. These outer pieces are at 10 millimeters, and this middle is lower. It doesn't really matter. You can, if I hold it in the light, you can definitely see the saw blade cuts right here. So this is why I'm going to use a planer to take off the extra 2 or 3 millimeters to make this a perfectly flat surface. It's just aesthetics, but I do like to make my puzzles look nice. So now I have all of the piece type 2 done. This is the easier of the 2, and I have one of piece type 3 done. What I do a lot at this stage of the build is do a quick test fit to make sure all the pieces will actually fit once I try to assemble the puzzle. I can see now that they do fit with a slight wobble, however this is okay. This is about the tolerance I work with. It's much easier to change anything now than after I've already planed these and I'm in the process of sanding these. So we know that one of these fits, and now for the other one, you can do exactly the same with all the other ones I made previously. Since these are all based off of a unit size, I know this should be 80 millimeters, which is 4 of these pieces. And they do fit together just nicely with very little wobble. And finally, we have all of that done. Every single project you will ever do or we'll always have the boring part. Carving out all of these pieces, especially the identical ones, was just boring, but you have to do it. So now we can get on to the fun part, which is using this. Now before we start, I would like to mention the type of bit I'm going to use. This is a 10mm one. That's because I just want to carve out the middle piece to make it perfectly flat. If I were to take a larger one, say this 18mm one, then yes, I can do one pass and carve out everything. But if I'm not careful, there is a chance I could just clip the edge and then have this rip through the wood, completely destroying it. So I would always prefer to use a smaller one and do multiple passes. Now when working with a router and having to change the bit, it is always important to make sure the machine is unplugged, 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 make sure the machine is unplugged. Make sure the machine is unplugged. Now for setting the depth. This is a trick I learned from my boss years ago, and honestly, it is really, really helpful. You can use bits. Just regular high-speed steel drill bits. In this case, I need a 10mm one. So what you do is loosen it, push it all the way down, so that effectively now it's at 0. The bit is touching this piece of wood. Then you loosen the depth gauge, put in your drill bit, apply a slight pressure, and tighten it again. Now, this is set to 10.0mm. It's to the exact tolerance of a drill bit, which in metric is 1/100th of a millimeter, which for wood is more than enough. So now I can actually get on to carving out the middle. And for that I made this custom jig quite a while ago. There's some numbers here. There's 4, which is the amount of pieces you can put in here. 20 by 20, which is how big the pieces are, and 80, which is technically incorrect because I'm lazy, and instead of making multiple jigs, I just moved this part over so now it can fit a piece which is 100mm long. Like that. Since there's 4 pieces, I can put 4 in, like so, and then I can use the sides to stabilize myself and carve out the middles, just like that. So now I have my jig in place, I'm ready to start routing out the middle, and just for this I'm going to take off my glasses and actually wear safety glasses, because I'll be kneeling down to get a better view from these pieces. So the first thing I'm going to do with these pieces is just move couple of millimeters into each side so that when I pass through it all the way, there's no chance of any splinters splitting out and ruining the pieces behind here. Yep, mistakes happen. Don't actually know what happened. Maybe this wasn't quite secured well enough, but this just flipped out. And I need to remake that piece. So an unfortunate mistake on one piece, which I have to redo, but now you can definitely see why I am routing out the pieces instead of just using a table saw. Because now these 2 outer cuts are the exact same depth as everything else. And if I hold a unfinished piece, you could definitely just see the difference. And this is the reason I'm using a router, just to get rid of this jagged appearance. So that was an unfortunate mistake. However, I did finish all of the pieces. These ones were definitely easier because they only have one thing instead of 2 cutouts. I did go a bit slower than I would normally. That's why I didn't film the second half of that, just because I wanted to go a bit slower than normal. But you can see, if I do a quick test fit, that the pieces still fit together. They are a tiny bit wobbly, but that may actually be a good thing once I'm actually assembling this. So here is the initial assembly of the puzzle, just to see if everything works, and everything does. It is a really well-fitting puzzle and really tight. There may be a few individual pieces which are a tiny bit loose. I can see a tiny gap there. I can see a tiny gap there. That's not really that big a deal. So now what I'm going to do is take this apart once again and then sand all the pieces and stain them. So I'm just about to sand all the pieces, and I quickly want to show how I do it. At first I take the end pieces. This is a particularly egregious example with that small black mark there. Not all of these are that bad. And just sand it smooth. Doesn't really take that long. Yeah, literally that's it. That black mark was because the table saw pushing against metal. That can occasionally happen. Then I have the two ends done. Then we're going to slightly break the edges here. And on the top as well. And that's the sanding done. It's not a lot of work, but it is a lot of pieces. Some are easier than others, and as well, with rounding off the edges, I am not going to round off any of the inner edges here. What I'm just going to do is on the outside once, like that. So this middle one will get caught in there, but that doesn't really matter. You do want things to be quite sharp so that it'll fit properly. If they're too rounded, it can become a bit loose. So for the staining, what I'm going to do is use rapeseed oil. I'm serious. I've used this for almost all of my puzzles now, and the reason is if I take a piece of beech wood, you can see the left one has been stained, the right one has not. There is actually quite a significant color difference between the two, and that's really all I want. I don't need any protection for the wood, because it's going to be inside the entire day, it's going to be on my shelf. So that's why this is good enough, and also it's a lot cheaper than actual wood stain. So I'm going to do all of this, assemble the puzzle once again, and finish the video when I'm done. And here is the puzzle fully complete. I absolutely love how the stain looks. It makes everything a lot darker and a lot more dark red color if you look at one of the pieces individually. I love this wood, and I would definitely like to make more puzzles with this. However, I don't actually have that much left over, so I do need to be careful with what I make, because I may run out of pieces and not easily find a replacement. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed the video. The plans for this puzzle will be available in the description if you want to make this yourself. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.